A bombshell report in The Atlantic about the FBI Director Kash Patel is making the rounds in Washington this morning. Staff writer Sarah Fitzpatrick wrote in an investigative piece that published last night, quote, Patel, according to multiple current officials as well as former officials who have stayed close to him, is deeply concerned that his job is in jeopardy. He has good reason to think so, including some having to do with what witnesses described as bouts of excessive drinking, end quote. You might remember back in February when Kash Patel was seen celebrating with the U.S. men's hockey team after their gold medal victory in the recent Winter Olympics. The incident apparently raised eyebrows for many in the Trump administration, according to Fitzpatrick, but she reports the concerns of FBI officials she talked to go much further than that. Quote, they said that the problems with his conduct go well beyond what was previously known and include conspicuous inebriation and unexplained absences. His behavior has often alarmed officials at the FBI and the Department of Justice, even as he won support from the White House for his eager participation in Trump's effort to turn federal law enforcement against the president's perceived political enemies, end quote. In response, Team Patel is readying for a fight. The FBI director's spokesperson, Erica Knight, is denying The Atlantic's reporting and threatening legal action. She posted online, quote, lawsuit is being filed, end quote. Now, we should emphasize here that MS Now has not independently confirmed any of this reporting. Fitzpatrick writes that the implication of Patel's conduct for the FBI, America's premier law enforcement agency, are huge. Quote, some at the FBI are concerned that Patel's behavior has left the country more vulnerable. One former senior intelligence official told me that there's a lack of experience at FBI headquarters and that the turnover rate is high in field offices because of both voluntary departures and Patel-ordered purges. The result is an FBI workforce being asked to accomplish more with fewer resources and with less direction from the top, end quote. The Atlantic's Sarah Fitzpatrick joins me now. Sarah, welcome to the show. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you.
Sarah, I want to touch on that last point first. So I was just talking to David Rode about the situation in Iran. That's actually central to a lot of this. There have been a number of Iran experts at the FBI who were let go. Kash Patel was asked about this at Congress. He said that it was about an unrelated matter, but they're sort of weak on that front. And America is at war with an adversary that does actually have proven capabilities to cause trouble in America.
Absolutely. I think that is the center of this reporting, the through line of the reporting, and why I was able to kind of have this pattern documented at so many different levels, not just within the FBI, but outside of it, other national security agencies. This is a government-wide alarm that people are trying to sound because, again, they feel that the stakes right now are so high, particularly relevant to the threats that are coming from Iran, but also other actors that may sense this moment of weakness for the United States and take advantage of that. So yes, that is the key point, the key fear that underlines this story, and that I hear from everyone I talk to almost on a daily basis.
So, I want to separate the two issues because one may agree or disagree with the fact that he may be drinking. That's separate from the operational issues that a lot of people spoke to you about that were concerns. You write on multiple occasions in the past year, members of his security detail had difficulty waking Patel because he was seemingly intoxicated, according to information supplied to Justice Department and White House officials. A request for quote, breaching equipment, end quote, normally used by SWAT and hostage rescue teams to quickly gain entry into buildings, was made last year because Patel had been unreachable behind locked doors, according to multiple people familiar with the request. I quote this, Sarah, because this isn't a discussion about whether you think he should drink more or drink less. It's a specific example of we needed to get Kash Patel and we couldn't get him.
It's a specific example of the alarm, the concern by people within the FBI that this could be a major problem in the future and that there needed to be an elevated level of resources beyond what is normal. And I think it's really important to note that this request, I think, just set off alarm bells, and it speaks to just how well known this problem was, that it required, that this request went in and was sent up above. So yes, exactly. It is a sign of, again, his colleagues and others in the national security establishment who are fearful that this conduct could place American citizens and members of the FBI in danger.
What was interesting was how you started the article, in which you say, on Friday, April the 10th, as FBI Director Kash Patel was preparing to leave work for the weekend, he struggled to log into an internal computer system. He quickly became convinced that he had been locked out, and he panicked, frantically calling aides and allies to announce that he had been fired by the White House, according to 9 people familiar with his outreach. He had not been fired. The access problem, 2 people familiar with the matter said, appears to have been a technical error, and it was quickly resolved. This is interesting because there is a through line in your story about the fact that, first of all, if drinking is an issue, this is not, Donald Trump's not a drinker and doesn't tend to like that sort of thing. But you're implying that Kash Patel has some sense that he's on thin ice.
Absolutely. I mean, I think he is openly acknowledging that to people that he knows, people that he's speaking to, and people in the White House are openly acknowledging that as well. So I think that this is not, but it's, you know, it's a very unusual circumstance and perhaps a very dangerous circumstance, because you have someone who is clearly feeling on the edge, feeling frightened, and that has security and other leadership, you know, ramifications and implications that could be problematic. So it's a bit of a perfect storm of, you know, you don't want your cabinet officials to not feel secure in their jobs, ideally, I think. And we see in the Trump administration that that's often used as a lever, that there's a level of unpredictability, there's a level of mixed signals, and everyone always feels that they are on the edge. But Patel is feeling that particularly acutely right now.
Okay. Well, welcome to Investigate Everything. My name is Brian O'Shea, and we're just going to get right into it. Normally, I try to have a longer cold open. Hopefully, you've had time to read my Substack on this and also the article itself. So what's going on? Right now, we have, out of the blue, the Atlantic magazine writes an article about Kash Patel, saying he's a drunk, he had to use the jaws of life to get out of his office. And interesting timing, because shortly thereafter, on Monday, Kash Patel announces that there's multiple indictments going down against the Southern Poverty Law Center. But prior to that is even more interesting, and we're about to get into that now. I'm going to just read from my Substack so we can stay on track, so bear with me. What we have here, though, just so you understand, is what I've figured out is there are alarming connections between this writer and Paul Weiss, which is the law firm that you may recall Donald Trump made bend the knee when they were caught doing all sorts of bad things back in the early part of, right after his inauguration. So Paul Weiss is a power law firm, okay? And it is huge. It's, all of the deep state people, if you want to call them that, were really pumped up when Donald Trump basically told Paul Weiss, you're going to lose all your government contracts and, your clearances, everything like that, because they have government contracts. Well, Paul Weiss did something no one expected. They shuffled down to the White House, bent the knee, and pretty much begged for their survival. Now, personally, when that happened, I thought Donald Trump should have just finished them. There's a great author named Robert Greene. He wrote the 48 Laws of Power, and I think it's rule number 14 that says, destroy your enemies totally. I believe that Donald Trump should have done that. I'm not critiquing Donald Trump's style in anything. He seems to always come out on top. But I am saying this is one of those moments where maybe he's thinking, I should have taken out Paul Weiss. Let's get into that and why, and let's get into the timing of this report. Okay. Now, in summary, one of America's most powerful law firms is playing a role, in my opinion, in undermining FBI Director Kash Patel through media and personal connections, but potentially to protect the official narrative of the 2016 Russia investigation and many other things. Let's get started. So President Trump and his administration have been under attack by both sides of the political aisle since Trump first took office in 2016. And now even more since President Trump was reelected in 2024, something they never expected. Every action this president has taken or even planned to take has been met with lawsuits, judicial stays, crazy protests in the streets, and even coordinated media attacks. And of late, as we've seen, attacks from so-called MAGA. Okay. Now, these attacks have shifted from targeting the president directly to targeting key donors, conservative media, and even senior members of the Trump administration. This has driven or forced several of the administration's key figures out of office at critical times for the administration. It almost seems like an attempt to weaken the Trump administration by picking off his closest advisors and appointees. And now it is the director of the FBI, Kash Patel's turn. Now, I do want to also point out, this is not in my article, that this Atlantic article, interestingly, came out right after President Donald Trump negotiated the Lebanese-Israeli peace deal. Historic. And of course, they have to, someone had felt the need to drop a giant pigeon stool on top of that. That could be part of the timing, but I think it's a little darker than that. Since Patel took on the role of director of FBI, he has been no stranger to attacks on his character and or his fitness for office, attacks on that. The majority of these attacks prior to 2026 came from Representative Jamie Raskin. Now, we all know Jamie Raskin. He's loud, he's squealy, he's kind of annoying, and he pretty much attacks everything. And that's where I started. I started looking at Jamie Raskin, like, what are his ties to Atlantic? After I got over the questions of why did the Atlantic publish this article? Okay, we'll get into the article in a second. But the majority of his attacks came prior to 2026, especially as he is the top Democrat on the House Judiciary Committee. Raskin's attacks have ranged from issues related to the Epstein files, perceived political retaliation, like the FBI being weaponized by the Trump administration to go after Trump's political opponents. I think the DOJ is going after Trump's political opponents, but I think it's because they have a reason to, legally, as we've seen. Hello, Southern Poverty Law Center. And Raskin has even questioned, the FBI director's fitness for office. However, since March of 2026, there has been a noticeable increase in reputation attacks and condemnations targeting FBI Director Kash Patel personally, with some spillover criticism of broader DOJ FBI leadership policies and personnel decisions. The escalation is evident in media coverage volume. Let me back up a second. What I'm talking about here is like since about February, ironically, since Venezuela and since the launch of the Iran leashing, we've seen numerous attacks, especially going after Kash Patel. Everything from, he's weaponizing the DOJ to how dare you investigate Comey, or, what else is in the Epstein files? You got to release them. But some that really stuck out to me are the enraged comments about Kash Patel still looking at what we call Russiagate, or the Russia hoax, as Donald Trump likes to call it, President Trump likes to call it. It just recently, Kash Patel has made numerous statements about a lot's coming out. A lot of people are going to get indicted about Russiagate. Now, for those that don't know what Russiagate is, Russiagate goes way back to Donald Trump's first term, where the Democrats tried to say Donald Trump was put into office by the Russians, and they helped him steal the election. And they actually said steal the election. And they did this big investigation, and you might recall Adam Schiff going, I've got the goods, I got the receipts. He never had anything. And actually, investigations showed, reviews of this whole investigation showed that, it was total bogus. There was no connection. And you just have to look at the record to figure that out. Putin has not benefited from Donald Trump being in office at all, unless you count like the recent spike in oil prices because, the Russians have been able to sell oil and natural gas to the Europeans at a slightly higher rate because they have no other choices, but now they do. They've got us. But anyways, that's what Russiagate is. Nothing was ever proven. It's totally false. And actually, I'm working on another piece that kind of shows that Chuck Schumer, he's got a lot of big-time Russian connections with some of the deepest pockets in the oligarchy. But that's not for tonight. That's for another episode. Anyways, so we've seen these escalate since March of 2026. So it's everything. And if you go to C-SPAN, I didn't have time to do the cold open. You go to C-SPAN, you could see what they're questioning Kash Patel about. The Democrats are really upset about the fact that he's still looking into Russiagate. Really upset that he's looking into J6 being something maybe organized. They were extremely upset that all these indictments on the Southern Poverty Law Center came down. And I didn't have time to incorporate that in, but I will say I have found that Paul Weiss has a lot of interactions with the Southern Poverty Law Center. Okay, but that won't be tonight. The escalation I did find is evident in media coverage, volume, political statements from Democrats, and social media activity. While Patel and the Trump-era DOJ, FBI, and more broadly other offices involved faced ongoing scrutiny earlier in his tenure, for example, over agent firings is a big one, resource shifts, and past travel controversies, the period since mid-March saw new triggers and clear amplification, peaking in mid to late April. The Atlantic article as an interestingly timed weapon. In mid to late April 2026, which was Friday, attacks on Patel came from a new direction and seemed to focus on his character, using details from a poorly sourced article written by Sarah Fitzpatrick, who is a staff writer at the Atlantic magazine. Why do I say poorly sourced? Because every single one of her sources is quote unquote anonymous. Every single one. So on April 17, 2026, The Atlantic published a damaging expose titled "The FBI Director is MIA." Staff writer Sarah Fitzpatrick reported that FBI Director Kash Patel had alarmed colleagues with episodes of excessive drinking, unexplained absences, and erratic behavior that some insiders described as a national security risk. The story, sourced from more than 24 anonymous current and former DOJ officials, landed like a thunderclap on the already embattled DOJ and the Trump administration. And by embattled, I don't mean they're losing that battle. I just mean they're constantly getting attacked. Of course, Kash Patel and his legal team wasted no time, and hat tip to Kash Patel for wasting no time, in mounting a counterattack. 2 days after the story was published, he filed a $250 million defamation lawsuit against Fitzpatrick and The Atlantic, calling the piece a coordinated hit job. And it seems, based on a lot of different information, he may be onto something with that. Okay, let's talk about Chuck Schumer, and we'll get back to the Atlantic article. Now, on the heels of the Atlantic article, all of a sudden, Chuck Schumer, who's never like Kash Patel, he was loud in the past, suddenly got loud again, kind of outshouting the squealy Jamie Raskin. He actually became one of the loudest and most powerful voices on Capitol Hill to attack Kash Patel. He even went so far to call for Patel's resignation and referred to him as a threat to national security. And you know what his only source is? The Atlantic article. The timing of the article is the most obvious data point that we need to look at. In the recent days, Kash Patel has made a number of public statements that seem to have enraged many powerful Democrats and well-known commentators. As a matter of fact, one commentator that it seemed to really tweak was Loretta Lynch, the former AG at DOJ. She, especially on the Russiagate stuff, she's been making her rounds going, hey, that's old news. Why are we looking into that and not worrying about today's problems? She's also vying for some AG position that the Republicans are currently blocking. We'll get into those details later this week. So anyways, Kash Patel has made comments about a lot coming out on Russiagate. The Southern Poverty Law Center dropped, I think, last night. The J6 investigation, which shows, according to Kash Patel and numerous sources, shows possible DNC collusion in setting that whole thing up. And multiple other investigations. There's a lot that's gone down with fentanyl. There's a lot that's gone down with human trafficking, the border, everything. There's a lot going on. And it's my opinion that a lot of these things are going to drop before the midterms because, hey, strategically, that's the way to play it. If you are the Trump administration, I would do nothing different. So, again, Russiagate put them into a tailspin, especially for some reason, Chuck Schumer. Okay. In reaction, the Democrats and their legacy media mafia, as Kash Patel called them last night in a press conference, they've doubled down on the claims in the anonymously sourced Atlantic article, focusing on the allegations of Patel's alleged quote-unquote drinking problem, instead of addressing the key investigations that most of them seem to want to ignore. Now, I do want to state that I lived in D.C. I didn't work on the Hill. I worked in the intelligence community, but I went to a lot of Capitol Hill events. Okay, and I'm not saying Kash Patel is an excessive drinker. I don't know Kash Patel. The only time I've ever seen him drink was at a hockey celebration for our Olympic team. I do want to note that in addition to him drinking a beer, he's a hockey player celebrating our country's gold medal win. And if anyone's ever been to a DC United game, which is, I would say, bipartisanly attended in DC, there's a lot of beers being thrown up in the air and people drinking at those. I'm sure they're not all alcoholics. I used to be one of those rabid DC United fans. Love that team. I love the games a lot. But anyways, that's what they're focused on. It is his drinking. Okay. Now, again, anyone can take a picture of anyone having a beer and say, oh my God, he's a drunk. You do notice, though, they're not talking about Chris Holland down there having margaritas with Tren de Aragua members. Is he a drunk and a gang member? Maybe. I mean, based on their level of evidence that you need to prove that. Different story for a different time. Okay. So why is Schumer suddenly leading the attacks on Patel? I have a theory. Let's take a step back from the controversy around the Atlantic article for just a second, then we'll get to the meat on the bone that you came here for. I think it's about Russiagate. It should be noted that since the Atlantic article dropped, Schumer's gotten loud and proud. I got some redundancy in my article I need to fix here, calling for Patel's immediate resignation on the Senate floor. Schumer cited the Atlantic article to allege that excessive drinking and erratic behavior are a grave risk to the rule of law and national security. This is Chuck Schumer. While the personal allegations have dominated recent headlines, the deeper tension appears to stem from Patel's aggressive stance on Russiagate. This is my opinion. Since taking over the FBI, Patel has publicly claimed he uncovered hidden documents related to the Trump-Russia investigation. He even called it a political crime scene, you might recall that, and stated that recently that arrests are coming, involving figures from that probe, including individuals Schumer has previously defended, such as former FBI Director James Comey and CIA Director John Brennan. Schumer's past support for the 2016 Russia investigation, his defense of Comey after his 2017 firing, and his recent criticism of delays in releasing the Epstein files all put him on a direct collision course with Patel's stated agenda. Let me say that again. Everything Patel is doing is really bad news, in particular for Schumer, especially based on who he's defended and how he's placed himself in all of those situations since 2016. In short, the fight looks to me less about Patel's personal conduct and more about who controls the FBI's reckoning with the events of 2016 and 2017. Like, they're going after Patel hard. And they always have, but like I said earlier, the uptick has been crazy since Patel has started talking about dropping indictments, and you're going to watch it get worse now. It's going to get worse because the Southern Poverty Law Center, which has tentacles everywhere. But we'll get back to Chuck in just a moment, because there is one very interesting connection Schumer has with this latest attack. All right, let's talk about the Atlantic article and the Paul Weiss nexus. While the article itself focuses on Patel's alleged personal conduct, a deeper look at the author, Fitzpatrick, has revealed an alarming concentration of connections that all lead back to one law firm, Paul Weiss. Here's the biggest one. Again, Sarah Fitzpatrick. Get out your pencils, write this down. This is huge. This is breaking. I'm breaking it. I've never broken anything, but I think I've broken this one. My first scoop, maybe. Sarah Fitzpatrick appears to be married to a gentleman named Matthew Carhart. Let me see if I could get his picture up there for you. Who is this guy? Well, Matthew Carhart, he's a lawyer who worked as a litigator or a litigation associate at Paul Weiss from October 12 to January 2017. Now, I know what you're saying. You're saying, hey, Brian, big deal. So he worked at Paul Weiss. It's a huge law firm, has a lot of lawyers. Right, you'd be right in saying that. Has a ton of lawyers. It's a power firm. But here's the crazy part. Remember those anonymous sources inside and outside the DOJ? Well, he actually started working at the DOJ in January of 2017, where he remains today. Let me say it again. The husband of Sarah Fitzpatrick, the author of the hit piece by The Atlantic on FBI Director Kash Patel, currently works at DOJ, where he started in January of 2017, which was the last month of the Obama administration before Trump's first term. And he previously worked at Paul Weiss. All right, that's our first connection there with Paul Weiss. And he remains a senior trial counsel at DOJ today. Now, I'm not saying he's one of the anonymous sources. I have no evidence of that. But it bears a little scrutiny, okay? In addition to normal pillow talk, maybe he's an unwitting source for her article that talks in his sleep. You know, he kind of babbles while he's sleeping. Like, I'm going to make up a story about Kash Patel. You should write this down. Or maybe he was put there for a reason. Maybe he is one of those things we call embeds at the DOJ that the Trump administration missed because he's still there. I'm not saying that lightly. Okay. Matthew Carhart, his timing of his career is interesting. The timing of Matthew's departure from Paul Weiss and his onboarding at DOJ is very notable. Matthew Carhart joined the DOJ in January of 2017, the very last days of the Obama administration. While Loretta Lynch, who was at the time the Attorney General for DOJ, that was her last month at DOJ. Matthew Carhart's first month, Matthew Carhart being the husband of the writer of the Atlantic article, as far as I can tell. I think they're still together. So Matthew Carhart starts in January of 2017 as Loretta Lynch, Obama's AG, is leaving. Okay, but she was still the Attorney General at DOJ when Carhart started. It gets better. Loretta Lynch, let me get her up here. Let me share this screen. Stop sharing this one. I gotta share this. Okay. Here we go. So there's Loretta Lynch. Okay. She happened to, after she left the DOJ a couple of years later, guess where she went to work in 2019? She went to work at Paul Weiss. Although there's no public evidence that Lynch personally recruited or hired Carhart while he was at the firm, the overlap raises an obvious question. Did Lynch's presence and influence at Paul Weiss play any role in Carhart's hiring there in 2019, in 2012, or in his smooth transition to DOJ in 2017? Obviously, the dates are off for the first one. I have to correct that. But the fact that she was DOJ, in charge of the DOJ, in January 2017, when Carhart got hired, coming from a very left-leaning law firm that Trump later made bend the knee, I think it's pretty interesting, right? It doesn't seem like the kind of guy that Trump administration would hire, but then again, Trump was new at the swamp back then. Maybe he didn't know. Who knows? Or maybe he isn't in bed, who was placed there strategically by Loretta Lynch to keep tabs on the DOJ and keep disrupting what's going on there, or even provide anonymous sources for wayward journalists. I'm just asking questions. Anyways, moving on. So that's Loretta Lynch at Paul Weiss. Okay. Get her off the screen. There we go. Now, let's keep going. So this is not a small detail. Carhart was moving from a major Democratic-aligned law firm into the Justice Department at the precise moment the Russia investigation was heating up. And Loretta Lynch held ultimate authority over the DOJ at that time for a small period of time of that overlap. And his former firm, Paul Weiss, is stacked with people who have deep stakes in the events of the current Russiagate investigation, currently being led by Director Kash Patel. And so we're clear, the Democrats' Russia probe was investigating possible ties between the Russian government and Donald Trump. The Russiagate investigation is investigating certain people's involvement in creating a Russia hoax to try to steal the presidency or undermine or jail and impeach Donald Trump, okay, during his first term, and try to make him unfit for office, whatever. So just so you understand the difference. Russia probe, Democrats, Russia hoax or Russiagate being run by Kash Patel, which I think it needs to happen, obviously. Okay, let's talk about this firm's deep ties. I just said that they have a bunch of people at Paul Weiss now who are involved in a lot of these ongoing investigations. So Paul Weiss is far more than a footnote in this story. The firm currently employs some key figures in investigations Patel and the FBI are currently active on. One of those people is Loretta Lynch, formerly U.S. Attorney General, 2010-2015 in the Eastern District of New York, and then later Attorney General of the United States, 2015 to 2017. Let me read her bio here. As Attorney General, she oversaw the DOJ's initial response to the 2016 Russian hacking of the DNC and Clinton campaign, publicly defended the FBI's handling at that time of the December 2016 interviews. Lynch has testified before the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence in October of 2017 as part of congressional investigations into Russian active measures and interference in the 2016 election, known as Russiagate. A disputed Russian intelligence document, later deemed unreliable by the FBI, also surfaced alleging she privately assured a Clinton campaign staffer that Clinton email probe wouldn't go too far. So let me just be clear here, and I kind of cut and paste that from the internet. Later deemed unreliable by the FBI, that piece of evidence. Just keep in mind who the FBI was at that time. Okay, it was all of her buddies, so it may be turn out that that piece of evidence is reliable. We'll find out. Wouldn't go too far. An episode that intersected with the broader Russia narrative and was examined in congressional probes. She has publicly endorsed Kamala Harris's 2024 presidential campaign. No records tie her to J6, Trump impeachments, or election fraud claims. By the way, I got all this from the Paul Weiss website, so bear with it. Another person that works at Paul Weiss is a guy named John P. Carlin. Okay, worked there. And he had roles there through 2022. He was head of the National Security Division during the critical 2015-2016 period. He oversaw counterintelligence and FISA-related matters when FBI opened its Crossfire Hurricane investigation into Russian links to the Trump campaign, the core of Russiagate. He was interviewed by He was interviewed by the HPSCI in July 2017 and referenced in Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, SSCI, Russian investigation transcripts and reports regarding Russian active measures, election infrastructure threats, and the U.S. government response. He has written and spoken publicly on Russian election interference threats, of course he has, including in 2020 and beyond. Doesn't seem to have any involvement in the DNC specific probe details, J6, Trump impeachments, election fraud, or Democratic campaigns. And again, more to follow on that because I'm going to probe into all these people. There's another one there named Melinda Haig, who was U.S. Attorney, North Carolina, 2010-2015, publicly endorsed Kamala Harris's 2024 presidential campaign, one of several Paul Weiss partners, including Lynch, who also did. Again, no records directly at this point. And last but not least, now this is the one you don't want to miss. Who else works at Paul Weiss? And just to review for the people just joining us, the writer of the Atlantic article, Sarah Fitzpatrick, appears to be married to a guy named Matthew Carhart, who currently works at the DOJ and prior worked at Paul Weiss, and seems to have been hired in the last few days that Loretta Lynch, Obama's AG, was leaving DOJ when Trump took his first term. And then to review also, Chuck Schumer all of a sudden is very loud about these allegations of Kash Patel being a drunk who locks himself in his office and they need the jaws of life to get him out. So who else works at the firm? Oh, Chuck Schumer's brother, Robert Schumer. He works at Paul Weiss, the same firm. All right. Here's a little background on the Paul Weiss Trump thing. Okay, and remember the whole thesis here is Paul Weiss, are they involved for revenge? Is it coincidence? Or are they still a very viable weapon of the Democrats who just cannot let go of power? So a little background. You may recall in March 2025, the firm itself became a target of the Trump administration. President Trump issued an executive order suspending security clearances for Paul Weiss lawyers and banning the firm from federal contracts. That is devastating for any firm in D.C. and Northern Virginia. The firm eventually settled, and they settled the matter by agreeing to provide the equivalent of roughly $40 million in pro bono legal services to Trump-aligned causes, a deal many viewed as a humiliating capitulation for the law firm. Now, Donald Trump, President Trump, if you are hearing this, my recommendation is you might want to get a different firm regardless of that free pro bono work that was part of the deal. You may just want to have them cut you a check for $40 million or the American people a check, because I don't know if I'd want Paul Weiss anywhere near any projects that I was interested in. So now it was humiliating for Paul Weiss. It was humiliating for Paul Weiss. Every one of the other power law firms like, yeah, go get him, Paul Weiss. Go get him. You'll show that Donald Trump. And then Paul Weiss came back with their tail between their legs and looked pretty stupid and humiliated. So barely a year after that, the wife of former Paul Weiss lawyer has published one of the most damaging attacks yet on Kash Patel, the man tasked with potentially reopening the very investigation that began on Loretta Lynch's watch. Let me read it again. Paul Weiss, after getting humiliated by Donald Trump, a year later, the wife of a former Paul Weiss lawyer has published one of the most damaging attacks on Kash Patel, and he's also her husband's current DOJ guy, has published one of the most damaging attacks on Kash Patel yet. The man tasked with potentially reopening the very investigation that began on Loretta Lynch's watch. You get this? And Loretta Lynch is a partner over at Paul Weiss. So I got two theories, I got one firm. There's two ways you could read into these overlapping connections. The first is institutional revenge. Paul Weiss was publicly pressured and embarrassed by the Trump administration in 2025. Striking at Trump's FBI director could be seen as payback. Second, and more serious possibility, is that this is an effort to protect the Russiagate narrative. And I misspoke earlier about Russiagate and the definitions, but I'll correct that. Second, the more serious possibility is that this is an effort to protect the Russiagate narrative. Kash Patel has made clear that he intends to declassify remaining documents and investigate the origins of the 2016 probe. That effort directly threatens the legacy of the Obama-era DOJ, the public defense of the investigation offered by Chuck Schumer, and the institutional reputation of everyone involved, including former Attorney General Loretta Lynch, currently a partner at Paul Weiss. The investigation would inevitably shine a harsh light on decisions made during Loretta Lynch's tenure as Attorney General, on the public defense and the probe offered by, I just repeated myself, you got it, by Chuck Schumer, and on the broader institutional reputation of the DOJ and the FBI during that period. In this view, Paul Weiss isn't just settling an old score. It may be acting as a high-end instrument for those who desperately need the 2016-2017 story to stay buried. The Atlantic article doesn't just damage Patel personally, it undermines his credibility at the exact moment he is trying to force transparency on the very events that people connected to Paul Weiss helped shape. And just a little more on Chuck Schumer. Chuck Schumer has been one of Kash Patel's most vocal critics. Boy, I got to really edit this article. I just wanted to get it out before the live, so forgive me. I put a little note in there to that effect. Chuck Schumer has been one of Kash Patel's most vocal critics. This is true. Dick Durbin, Chuck Schumer, and Jamie Raskin have been probably the most vocal. They've been the most vocal critics, repeatedly demanding his resignation. Loretta Lynch, now comfortably at Paul Weiss, has publicly defended the original Russia investigation on multiple occasions. And now a journalist tied to the firm through marriage drops a story that could kneecap the man threatening to expose it all. None of this proves conspiracy. Law firms are full of talented, ambitious people with overlapping social and professional circles. Journalists marry lawyers all the time. But when the threads keep leading back to the same prestigious address on 6th Avenue, it's reasonable to ask whether we are watching organic journalism or something a little more calculated. The battle over the FBI is no longer just about policy or personnel. It has become a struggle over who controls the official story about what happened in 2016 and whether that story will ever be allowed to change and whether the truth will ever see the light of day. More to follow. And remember, Paul Weiss, they've already shown that they know how to cut a deal when its survival is at stake. The question now is whether it is also willing to wield its considerable influence, which still remains, through media, through personal connections, or through the revolving door, to ensure that the Russiagate narrative remains exactly where powerful people want it, safely in the past. And that is my show for tonight. I will take a couple questions if they are there. I'm going to make it a short one tonight because I'm still digging into this. And Ernie, thanks for joining me. That's funny. Ask Schumer about Grandma Vodka, Nancy Pelosi. Ernie, I actually heard Nancy Pelosi is or was Gavin Newsom's like aunt by marriage, or was. So, but really quickly, I want to just share my article with you so you can see it. I did some summarizing at the end, so it's easier for everyone. I'm just going to share that with you now. Okay. So here's the timeline of events. And you can go to brianoshea.substack.com. I will put that on the banner below. This is a free article. I do appreciate paid subscriptions because this is a lot of work, and I'm doing it for myself. I'm doing it for you. I'm doing it really. This one, I was really driven to do this for Kash Patel, because whether or not he's got a drinking problem, I don't know. Doesn't look like he does, but who knows? That's not the point. He needs to know the connections here if he doesn't already. And believe it or not, the FBI doesn't always know. There's a lot of cases. There's only so many people. But here's a key timeline of events. 2012, Matthew Carhart joins Paul Weiss as a litigation associate. 2015, Loretta Lynch is appointed as U.S. Attorney General by President Obama. 2016, July, FBI opens Crossfire Hurricane, the Russia investigation into the Trump campaign during Lynch's tenure as AG. January 2017, Matthew Carhart leaves Paul Weiss and joins the Department of Justice in the same month, while Loretta Lynch is still Attorney General. April 2017, Loretta Lynch leaves the Justice Department. 2019, Loretta Lynch joins Paul Weiss as partner. March, skipping ahead to March 2025, Trump administration issues an executive order targeting Paul Weiss, suspending security clearances, and barring the firm from federal contracts. Late March 2025, Paul Weiss reaches a controversial settlement with the Trump administration, agreeing to provide approximately $40 million in pro bono legal services to Trump-aligned causes. 2025, and I'm not sure when in 2025, Sarah Fitzpatrick, who was previously a producer at places like, go guess, like MSNBC, CBS, PBS, long way back. She was not really much of a writer. She produced shows. And all of a sudden she's a writer at The Atlantic. That's a little odd. But 2025, Sarah Fitzpatrick, Matthew Carhart's wife, joins The Atlantic as a staff writer. April 17th, 2026, all of a sudden, and don't quote me on this, it may be her first article or one of her first articles. 2026, right after peace in the Middle East, things are going really well, and also Kash Patel is announcing a lot of names, and files are going to be torn wide open, and a lot of things are going to be exposed. April 17th, 2026, which was this last Friday, The Atlantic publishes the FBI Director is MIA by Sarah Fitzpatrick, heavily criticizing Kash Patel's alleged drinking and behavior, with only anonymous sources, by the way. Anonymous. April 19th, 2026, Kash Patel files... I think it was over the weekend. Files a $250 million defamation lawsuit against Sarah Fitzpatrick and The Atlantic. Now, I want people to understand, too, and I'll put the actual... court documents in the description. According to the complaint, Kash Patel and his team actually tried to reach out to this reporter with their side of the story or whatever, or to say this is all BS. And that was never noted. I just want to say that. And I encourage everyone to read all the documents on this before making any judgments at all, especially from one article from, let's just say The Atlantic, not exactly a champion of conservative causes or America First causes. So take that with a grain of salt. April 2026, Chuck Schumer publicly calls for Kash Patel's resignation on the Senate floor based solely on The Atlantic article. based solely on the Atlantic article. Okay. Key players and their roles, Kash Patel, and I'll let you guys read the rest. They're all in there. Okay. So that is it for tonight. I'm not going to stay on too long. But remember, patterns, investigate everything. I want to give a hat tip to Dan Bongino. I don't know Dan Bongino, but to be quite honest with you, I was really trying to figure out, what could I do this week to help America, honestly. And I've been investigating the Dugan network, I call it, with all of these loser, fake MAGA idiots, clearly working for some sort of multipolar cult. And I just didn't want to do that this week. I needed a break from it. I've got Russia coming out of my ears. And I was just, listening to Dan Bongino. I listened to a few other podcasts, not many. And he was talking about this, and he had posed the question, why do you think they're really doing this? I was like, that's a really good question. And knowing this area the way I do from personal and professional experience, the first thing that caught my eye was, okay, well, the first thing I always look at, sometimes even before I read the article, is I look at who wrote it or how many people wrote it, and you look at them. And that's kind of where I landed on the Paul Weiss thing, was just looking at her and doing a little digging and finding, wedding announcement from way back when. And so there it is. And I'm glad I did, because look, honestly, I don't know Kash Patel's personal life, but to get attacked like this, to be called a drunk, and to have this Sarah Fitzpatrick go on, what is that, CNN, and say she only wrote it because she's worried about international affairs and national security. She's not worried about national security. She's worried about national security, and she actually had a story. It'd be my guess she would go to the DOJ above Kash Patel's head and say, hey, we got this thing. I also find it interesting. She never reached out, according to Dan Bongino, who was Kash Patel's second in command. And as Bongino said on his show today or yesterday, if they needed the jaws of life to get the director out of his office, surely the deputy director would have known about it. So I find the whole thing to be, look, personal opinion, just reading it, it seems like BS to me. Total BS. And let's not forget, it's not hard to get sources. First of all, they've cleaned house over there at FBI and got rid of a lot of dead weight. And those people are pissed. They have an axe to grind. And then what they also do is they can start rumors. They can say, hey, I saw that hockey video. Kash Patel looks like a real drunk. Do you think he's real drunk? And someone might say, well, I haven't seen him have a few drinks, And then okay, so he drinks. Okay, and then that becomes, hey, I've got one of your friends saying that Kash Patel, he's had a few drinks. Have you seen him had a few drinks? Yeah, oh yeah. We go out every Thursday for happy hour. Oh, so it's habitual drinking. So you can see the way you can make a story out of nothing. And always keep that in mind. And yes, these journalists, as you know, do play these games. So to Sarah Fitzpatrick, get a different job. You seem really dishonest. You seem pretty angry. Like I was just watching you, and your canines are showing a lot. So you got a lot of issues there that I think you should probably get dealt with. Maybe, get a cup of tea, or a little hug in a cup, whatever you need to get through a sister. To her husband, if that is still her husband, Matthew Carhart, might want to get your resume on Monster, because I have a feeling if this can reach the right ears, and I'm going to make sure it does, you should really be sat down in a chair and asked a lot of questions. And I'm just amazed no one has disclosed this connection, unless I'm completely wrong. But to you, yeah, I'd say you might want to get that resume ready. Might want to get it ready. Might want to pack your desk a little early, and I don't know your record. I got nothing personal against you. I don't know your political leanings, but the coincidence is you can't ignore them, dude. As for Chuck Schumer, first of all, stop doing crop rotation on your scalp. You're not fooling anyone. We can see it. hair plugs, hey, if that's your thing, that's fine. And also, dude, stop being just so you. It's just nauseating. We're just tired of it. People are numb to it. You don't turn the needle at all. You got enough to deal with the DSA going after you and all of your Democratic buddies trying to supplant you guys. Do something useful for the country. And then finally, for Kash Patel, I'll just say this. Hang in there, brother. I think you're doing a great job. Crime is down to historical lows. You're breaking all sorts of great cases open. The Southern Poverty Law Center was amazing. Keep doing what you're doing, and just keep your azimuth heading north and ignore the waves on the side, because they're just waves, fish, and vermin. So to everyone else, have a great night. Keep on investigating everything, and I will see you on the next show, which will be soon. Okay, have a great night, and I will talk to you all later. Thank you so much for tuning in.